Welcome to Practical Shamanism. I'm Katie Weatherup. I'm a former engineer with 20 years of experience working as a shamanic practitioner, and I hope to help you to connect to your personal power and magic and to support you in living a really good life that just keeps getting better. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to part 2 of What Gets in the Way of Soul Purpose. I realized I had a great deal to say, so if you haven't already, please listen to part 1 before you listen to part 2 because it will make a lot more sense. For the rest of my podcast, you can listen in whatever order you feel called, but the part 1 and part 2 really do work best in that order. So another big thing that gets in the way of soul purpose is emotional numbing. Emotional numbing takes a ton of energy and has a time limit on it. Sometimes we can call it also emotional debt, things that we didn't resolve at the time but pushed away that come back when we have a much bigger reaction. Whenever someone's having a disproportional reaction, it could be based on history. They never worked out how intensely angry they were at someone. So I'm on the dating apps, and one of the things that I, take a hard pass on is the person who's written the profile, like proactively punishing women for whatever his ex did. You could see it between the lines. So he's demanding that she be this way or that way, or not this way or not that way. And there's an implicit or else. Jenny Young of the Burned Haystack method calls it disciplinary directive, where, someone's using their About Me section to tell you how you darn well better be in the world if you want to, get with them. And my choice is that I really, really do not want to get with them. And so sometimes when we have these big emotional reactions, it's because of history, something that we haven't resolved from the past. And some of it is just kind of like a shorter fuse that's circumstantial. So if you're having a week where a loved one is in the hospital and you didn't get very good sleep and you're suddenly dealing with a flat tire, your emotional reaction to a flat tire is going to be a lot bigger potentially than the reaction that would have happened at other times. So one of the things I'm always doing if I start to notice my emotional stress level creeping up is putting into place more practices and more mindfulness and more engagement. So of course, if we're stressed, for many of us, some people love to exercise, some people it's a much harder thing, but I'm more disciplined about getting at least a moderate amount of exercise in times of stress because of not even the physical health, but just the relief of the kind of mental tension and emotional tension that could be building up in the background. So it's not the easiest to reckon with emotions, and I would say that it's a learnable skill, but our society on average does a horrible job of it. And even people who are really seeking, in the spiritual community, you see a lot of attempted spiritual bypassing and emotional avoidance and silver lining really awful things and toxic positivity and just a lot of things. And so if you really want to feel like you're living your life on purpose, reckoning with and getting good with and befriending and being competent at this messy business of feelings being part of the human experience, I think is non-negotiable. I just don't think that there's a really effective way to be fully engaged with what you're interested in being up to as a soul if you don't deal with that part of yourself. Another thing that can get in the way is argument with reality. I really, really love Byron Katie, and I know she can get a bad rap because people will use her non-consensually to tell people about their stories, and sometimes people try to power through their method and just skip ahead to oh well, I'll just go to the turnaround. If you're not familiar, I invite you to check it out. They don't do the process properly of writing everything down step by step. They try to skip ahead, and then it's not particularly effective. But what I love about what she says about it is it's not about living with a situation that's horrible. It's about being clear enough to respond effectively. And I think that's something that's misunderstood about her work. If you don't argue with reality, you accept an awful situation. But clear enough to respond effectively, I think is a really powerful having agency and choice and bringing your creativity back online and deciding if it's annoying enough to be worth the effort to make a change, and what are your possibilities and options. Like bringing your brain back into a way that it can deal with things like that, I think is really valuable. And when we're just in those loops of deep frustration and anger about something that aren't moving, my mother wasn't available in this way, or, my ex was so awful and it's been 10 years. I have a lot of compassion, we come by that honestly. There's a lot of the biology in our brain that works that way, but it really takes us out of being able to have an experience of life that feels like it has meaning and alignment for us. So also on the list are disconnecting from your body. I have lots of dissociative clients and clients who just, get caught up. So, oftentimes the guides are like, yeah, Kundalini yoga, not really your friend. I know you get really blissed out, but then you disconnect from your body. So all these other problems in your life are actually exacerbated. Try some grounding yoga that connects you to your body and gets you present and doesn't force energy to move as dynamically. And so, Qigong is really wonderful, but we do a lot of disconnecting from our body, and it is a learnable skill to be present in our body. And I can report, as somebody who disconnected a lot from her body growing up and learned to be really present in my body, it is a way better way to approach life. So much more effective. It's exhausting to be out of your body. You get really depleted because sustaining a soul and a body when they're not there at the same time. If you have ever played with leverage, maybe you've seen one of those posture things where if you're hunched forward and your neck sticking out, your head is subjectively a lot heavier than if you have your neck in proper alignment over your shoulders. Or if you're holding something, it's going to feel really different if you have your arm extended or you're holding the heavy thing close to your body. And similarly, the tiring nature of, being a human, I mean, we get tired and we sleep ideally every day, is incredibly exacerbated if you're sustaining your soul out of your body, that kind of difficulty. And again, going back to fatigue and just lack of presence, you're just kind of not going to be really home with yourself. Another thing that's going to get in the way of engaging with your soul purpose is if you're running addiction chemistry. So sometimes addiction is super obvious. You're smoking, you're doing meth, you're drinking heavily. And, not to say you can't have an occasional drink, but one of the catch-22s that really breaks my heart for energetically sensitive people that they probably don't know about when they found alcohol as a way to numb some of the energetic sensitivity they weren't trained to deal with and the over loudness of their psychic abilities, is that it breaks down your auric field and makes it more permeable if you use a lot of alcohol over a long period of time. A lot of other drugs do damage too. I have a podcast about how to restore your energy body if drugs or alcohol were part of your journey. But for these purposes, if that's happening, the problem that you're trying to solve gets worse and worse. So it ends up being this feedback loop where the more you break down your energy body, the more loud and intense and invasive the world gets. And so the more the craving is there to get the immediate relief of alcohol. And I think it's just really interesting and potent to understand how driven we are by rewards. So I was blown away by an NPR article that was talking about a controversial program that was actually working to get some people off of meth, where they just got a small gift card, like a $25 gift card every week if they came and had a successful drug test where they hadn't used. And people who'd been through rehab and all these different experiences, this was the thing that tipped it. And it just kind of speaks to how reward driven we are. And they were, talking about why that was. Now, granted, if you've been on drugs and you've gone through rehab, you probably learned a lot and dealt with a lot. But the fact that something that was, just such a simple reward could be so compelling, I think really tells a story. And we get rewards from scrolling on social media, and we get rewards from buying things, and we get rewards from sugar, and we get rewards from coffee. And it's not to say that we can't have any kind of, hacking our chemistry to feel better. I'm a big fan of my cold plunge. It's just nicely holistic, but why I like it, like there are all the health benefits. There's a long list of health benefits, but what I like about it is it gets rid of brain fog and elevates my mood and breaks up rumination that might be happening. And so there's just a clearer, more alert. It's just really good chemistry for me. And I'm not even going down to extreme, it could just be 58 degrees, which, can have me sucking air for the first 15 seconds. But really being aware of our biological chemistry, if you're in a chemistry cycle where you're trying to get your good feelings from sugar or alcohol or drugs or buying things, or, there's some kind of an addictive cycle where that's playing a really big role, the subtle good feeling of pleasure and fulfillment that is holistic isn't necessarily going to register because those biology rewards are so potent. So I have, again, another podcast. Obviously, I've created a lot by now on authentic pleasure and starting to move away from those chemistry rewards, or at least give yourself a budget and adult supervision. I tend to keep myself on a sugar budget because I'm like, yeah, my body can more or less deal with this. It's not the most optimal thing, but I happen to really like it. So I'll make sure that I eat sugar with fiber and on top of a meal and not by itself, and I confine it to only this much, and we seem to do okay with my particular body. So this isn't to say that you have to be swinging the pendulum in a really extreme way, but if it's gotten out of center, that's going to be something that really gets in the way of being able to have this sense of a meaningful nature to life. And finally, one of the things that can get in the way is a misunderstanding of what is soul purpose. So the thing is, the ego, the thing that you have really high status, like when you imagine yourself doing the thing and lots of people are like, oh my goodness, you've contributed so much to the world. We as humans really love those stories, and I don't think there's anything wrong with the story of the person who persisted in a scientific breakthrough or really raising awareness about a social issue that created change and better outcomes for people. I think all of that's really cool, but when we were planning our soul incarnation, we didn't have a third chakra. The third chakra is very important. I'm not against the third chakra. This is the seat of the ego, the sense of self. You just don't really want it to run the show. And the ego is kind of like, like certain breeds of dogs, you have to continue to reinforce that you're actually in charge, because if there's any extra space, they're glad to, kind of take over running the show. And people who are really effective at sharing their lives with that particular breed have the insight of part of the price of admission to have success is to be really super consistent with this particular dog in order to have things really go in an elegant way. And similarly, I'm not anti-ego. I think a strong sense of self is important, but it when it gets rigid, when it starts running the show, when it becomes really reactive, where the ego is constantly scanning for like, am I being insulted? The sort of air and life and flexibility that's optimal gets disrupted. And when it comes to soul purpose, a lot of times the third chakra, the thinking mind, the, sense of self, gets into the conversation in a way that is about status, is about being seen, is about an impact that is deemed meaningful by the masses. And that really wasn't what your soul was thinking about when you wanted to incarnate. And, if fame and fortune are something that you would enjoy, there are a lot of downsides and complexities to that, but, rock on. I'm not against that. Sometimes the amount of effort and the amount of luck that goes into it, it's like, sure, it might be great to win the lottery, but you probably don't want to structure your life around that. And we're just, I think it's useful to think about the population of the world, and that everyone came in with a soul intention. And some people are very far from engaging with what they thought they would like to get up to. A lot of stuff has gotten in the way, unexpected trauma. They used their free choice in a particular way that, went gloriously well or had some unforeseen consequences. It's super complicated, this business of being human. But sometimes when we start thinking about soul purpose, we're imagining something that is a doing thing instead of a being thing. And it could be either, but we often have this misguided idea of what at the end of life would really have us feeling deeply satisfied. And for a lot of us, there's clearing old pain and karma and leaving our soul lighter and more unburdened by complexities that we didn't manage to work through in past lives. And for some of us, there are people who are just like, I really want to experience motherhood. I'm not one of those people, but I have looked at people whose sole intention was it would be so amazing to get to be a parent in a time where, having incarnated or immigrated to a developed nation, I have a very small chance of infant mortality. Like even in the developing nations, collectively humanity has really rocked it on dropping rates of infant mortality. It's remarkable what a good job we've done, like yay, team humanity. I know we've still got a lot of stuff to work out, but I'm always encouraged by these markers that may all beings be well. There's been progress and movement. So the fact that overall world hunger keeps coming down, really reassuring, really makes me feel good about, some complicated problems that our group of humans that are on the planet right now are needing to reckon with and work out for future sustainability. But I digress. So coming back to soul purpose, again, I have some podcasts where I talk about that, and sometimes people have the idea that they have to find something that people will pay them and pay them very well for that also provides fulfillment, and that's what soul purpose is. And for, you're really lucky if, there's something that lands in the intersection of the Venn diagram of what you're good at and what the world needs and what people will pay you for and what you love to do. And yet there's so much more territory that resides outside of that. There's so much more, if you just look at the intersection of what you're good at and what people will pay you for, compared to, really trying to dial that in. And so if there isn't an easy, elegant way to do it, it might not be worth it. It might be more elegant to just have a functional, efficient job that leaves you with a lot of energy left over and is interesting enough. Like, I feel like engineering was a really good meantime job. I needed some time to do my own healing and grow up and, figure out more about who I wanted to be and work out social relationships and all these kinds of things that were really important as part of my journey. And coming to supporting myself with entrepreneurship later was very functional because I went part-time with my engineering job and built my practice until I was ready to shift into doing it full-time. And so that's one of the kind of mistakes, that there should be money with it. Some people seem to almost feel entitled, like, oh, I'm doing my purpose. I'm doing the thing that I'm passionate about and gifted about and that contributes to other people. And all of that is beautiful and wonderful and a meaningful expression in your life. But if you feel like, ergo, I should be paid for this, that's something that can really be in the way of soul purpose, because that just doesn't follow. It's a distortion of reality, and our brains are so good at distorting reality. They really want to pick the stories that they like and feed them. And there's so much marketing. You can buy so many programs that kind of sell the story that, here's how to do entrepreneurship and make money about the thing you're passionate about. And the truth is that, a number of those businesses aren't very successful and never get off the ground. And yet there's a lot of money in participating with this mythology. There are also some really effective, awesome programs. So I'm not trying to discourage you if you're like, yeah, I actually really do want to work on being paid to offer my gifts to the world, but there's a lot of strategicness and background business stuff that really has nothing to do with offering your gifts to the world that goes into that. And it's good to, to really, really be eyes wide open about that there's a lot of things that, have to do with spreadsheets and financials and all of that kind of thing, even for the most holistic business, if you want to create a certain level of financial stability. And so again, going back to that analogy of taking a trip, sometimes we might take a trip to contribute something to the world. I've certainly had people who went to Costa Rica and volunteered with orphans there and, helped take care of them and teach them and engage with them and spend time. And, that was cool. They had this beautiful experience. And some people want to go somewhere and be out in nature, and some people want to go somewhere and see their favorite sports team compete. And so there's just such a diversity. So if you think about living your life that you took a trip out of spirit from upper world where you were integrated with your higher self to travel to middle world to have some experiences. And that those might be things because, when we think about travel, a lot of times we're just choosing. I'm about to spend 2 days in Vancouver, which is a very short time for all the museums and gardens and hikes and ocean and islands. And there's just so much that is wonderful there because I've been researching. So I'll leave a whole bunch on the table. I'll perhaps get back there at some other time and perhaps not. But connecting with that sense of, what's alive for me? How would I want to spend my time? And if you start clearing these things in the way, clearing the monkey off your back for any kind of addiction, at least getting it wrangled so it isn't taking up so much space, and replenish yourself and calm the fight or flight and onboard the skill set of dealing with emotions effectively, even if you, do it a little bit kicking and screaming. I think people who have the ability to name what they're feeling and work with it in a healthy, balanced way, and they aren't indulging and they aren't numbing, but they're present to that and not arguing with the reality that they feel things, all of that, have a lot more access to the subtle cues that you're doing something that your soul finds really aligned. And I said finally, but I actually have one more. And some of that can be thinking that your soul purpose can't change. I might have already mentioned that, but the guides just want me to drop it in again, which is to say the awake and alive compass of warmer, colder for how to move through the world is meant to be a conversation with your higher self, with your guides, with your physical body, with your chakras that you have, with the relationships that you're interested in sustaining, with where you want to be on the planet, all of these kind of things. So I think this notion, sometimes with spirit guides, people give up their power. I want spirit to tell me what to do. Well, spirit can point out some things that are in the way of what you want to experience, and you can use this information however you like, but they're not living in our bodies. They're not living with the consequences. And so we always want to run it through our own discernment and see if we feel really aligned with counsel that we perceive ourselves as having received, especially because, it senses and interpretations and how the brain works, the brain distorts so much reality. And if we have a vested interest in believing something is true, I know many, many, many psychically gifted people who have been absolutely convinced spirit told them something that I am absolutely convinced spirit did not say, not their spirit guides, but they managed to sort of project and then perceive, and now they're holding it as justification for moving in a way that I can see is going to have some complexity with that. What I know about them, they may not end up enjoying. So there's similarly, with soul purpose, it's not something outside of yourself to discover. It's more about getting quiet enough for deep intimacy with yourself and eliminating or at least wrangling enough the things that are in the way so that you have space and bandwidth and the quietness inside to play the warmer, colder game. And, we could take a trip that we longed for and looked forward to and be like, actually I learned a lot. This wasn't nearly as fun as I thought it was going to be. Hey, glad I had the experience. I found ways to enjoy the richness, but I really didn't picture the mosquitoes or the heat or the, crowds, a lot of these Instagram worthy spots, they managed to get this great angle that doesn't show that, they had to wait 10 minutes before they could finally get up to the railing to take the epic picture. There can be all these things that we didn't anticipate before we incarnated. And so the choosing and choosing again and pivoting and learning about ourselves as we go and applying that information is a really, really important part of this living a life that's moving us toward enjoying it in the moment and also feeling, really delighted and satisfied with the experience that we had. Thank you so much for joining me. To learn more about me and my work, please visit my website at handsoverheart.com. There you can join my mailing list for access to free bonus content in the members-only area. If you've enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It would help me out a lot. Also, a special thank you to my patrons for your support. You offer me the time freedom to work on passion projects like this one. If you'd like to receive personal shamanic support from me and my team of guides, please consider joining my Patreon community. You'll find the link below. And again, thank you so much for listening. This is Katie Weatherup, wishing you wholeness and happiness.